Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're going to resume taking a look at some of my own games instead of looking at the U.S. Chess League games. So nothing wrong with them, they were very interesting, but I am happy to return to games about which I know a little bit more about, at least from the perspective of understanding what was going on during the games themselves, for the obvious reason, of course, that, well, I played the game. So, of course, that doesn't mean that I understood everything that was going on by any stretch of the imagination, as we'll see. So this was played a few days ago, at least as of this recording, in the 11th North American FIDE Invitational Tournament in Chicago, Illinois. Basically, it's an IM Norm event, and this was played in round 5, I believe, and yeah, round 5. And at this point, I was just starting to pick things up. So I had gotten off to a really poor start, losing in the first round to Pasalic on a blunder, and then round 2 I was simply outplayed by Ginsburg. Not a bad game, just a little bit worse every stage, and he did a nice job of expanding and growing his advantage in a long, patient game. Round 3, I was beating Tate, but let him slip out with a draw. So already at this point I had no margin for error, because the IM norm requirement was that the aspirant scored 6.5 points out of 9, and I've already given up the 2.5, so I'd have to just win the last 6 games. Nevertheless, I gave it a pretty good run. So I won in round 4 against a lower rated player, but a lower rated player who did some damage in the event, beating Young and almost ruining Pasalic's norm chance. So that was against Lenkarovic. And then this is in round 5, and here I'm playing black against Alexander Stamnov, who's a good, solid master, who's been living, I think, in the Chicago area, or at least not too far from the Chicago area, somewhere in the Midwest, for a number of years. Alright, so I'm a little bit of a favorite by rating, but I have the black pieces, and anything could happen, certainly. At this point in the tournament, of course, I had 1.5 out of 4, and I think he had maybe either the same score, maybe 2 points. So he was having an okay tournament, not a spectacular tournament, but he's playing all right. Now, this was the first round of the one-a-day games. So the tournament started on Saturday. We played 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday, and then the remaining 5 games were simply one a day, so Monday through Friday. So I had all day to prepare for this particular game, and I thought this was going to be fairly easy, because when I looked him up in the databases, all I saw when he had white playing 1e4 and facing e5 was the Scotch. So I spent a good deal of time preparing for this opening, and thought, okay, this is or at least a relatively easy game as far as preparation is concerned. The game might be very difficult, but at least I felt as if I was going to have things well under control in the opening. And you can imagine my surprise then when I faced the move to d4. Now, it's not that the center game is such a terrifying opening, though it is quite a lively and sharp way to play the game, and I think black does need to know something against a prepared opponent. So it's a very scary, it can be a scary line to face. And as a matter of fact, I hadn't worked on this particular opening in many years. In fact, I've only faced it twice, I think, in my entire tournament career. Once was at some point in the mid-'80s against a player, I think his name was Sherika, and that was played up in Reno in a state championship event when I lived in Nevada. And the second time I think I faced it was in the early 90s, after not having played for a number of years, and I believe I lost that game to a 2200 player. An interesting battle, but there my opening preparation was definitely not up to snuff. So here I am facing it for the first time in about 15 years. I don't even face it very often in blitz chess either, so this was really kind of an unpleasant surprise for me. Now, normally I tend to walk around quite a bit during games, probably a little bit more than I ought to, but this game, once d4 appeared on the board, and for quite a while longer, I didn't dare to move at all. I didn't take a step to the left or the right, didn't even look, didn't look up, didn't look down, nothing. I just focused as much as possible on what was happening on the board. And okay, if I got slaughtered like a chicken, well, so be it. It wouldn't be for a lack of effort on my part. So here I briefly considered playing the move knight to c6, trying to encourage a return to the Scotch if he played maybe knight f3. Well, then it would be a Scotch. But I think both d5 and especially d takes e5 are quite reasonable for white in this position. So I decided that I wouldn't go for funny little side variations about which I knew very little, just to avoid his preparation. So I decided to be principled and played e takes d4. Okay, he played queen takes d4. And here too I thought about alternatives, saw nothing that really looked especially clever. And so I played knight to c6, which is of course the main move, and deservedly so. Okay, now he played queen to e3. Queen to a4 actually exists too as another possibility. It's analogous, of course, to what black plays in the center counter. After e4, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, knight c3. But while it's certainly playable, it's not really anything special either. So queen to e3 is clearly, I think, the most dangerous move, supporting the e-pawn, which could advance in some cases. More importantly, preparing to swing the queen over to g3, as we'll see, and also keeping black's bishop off of c5 for the moment too. So it performs a number of useful functions there. All right, now here, a long time ago, and I think this is what I played in the Sherika game. I don't have it any longer, but from what I recall, in that game too, I was improvising over the board and came up with a line that I think worked quite nicely. So I played g6. Sherika was about a 2100 player, if I remember right, and in that game I managed to win very, very quickly with a nice attack. I mean, something like 22 moves. But as we'll see, this variation is not so good. So g6, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop d2, knight g to e7. So that way I don't have to worry about e5 shots on playing knight f6. Castle's long, castle's short. And I suspect we'd reach this position, but I don't know what my opponent played here. But just to show the trappy line, okay, the point of black's play is that he'd like to execute the move d5. And if he can play it and nothing really bad happens to him, he's going to be in fantastic shape. So let's say white plays something fairly blasé, like bishop to d3. Okay, so d5, threatening, of course, d4, takes, knight takes. The only sensible move here is to take again. And now we're hitting the a2 pawn, and we're hitting the g2 pawn, though I'm not sure that I want to take that one. So let's say king to b1 here. Well, now black has, I think, many very nice moves. I mean, you can probably just play something quite routine like bishop to e6, threatening mate in 2 with queen a2 and queen a1. And whatever white plays here, he's going to be making some real weaknesses. So this is the sort of idea that I had in mind when I played this line many years ago. But there's a very concrete tactical problem with this line. So here, first of all, white should play bishop to c4, preventing d5. And excuse me, at the time I thought this would be no big deal on account of knight to a5. If the bishop goes to b3, simply trade it off and then play d5. Okay, and now bishop to e2. But here's the problem. Okay, if black plays d5 now, which looks terrific, because again, bishop to e1 does nothing. Well, not again, I didn't point it out before, but if bishop to e1, d4 should be fine. The pawn is adequately protected. But here's the problem. E takes d5, knight takes d5, and now not the exchange. See, the exchange is perfectly good for black, who's again threatening to take on a2, and of course the queen is protecting the knight on a5. But in this position, white has a very strong move. And I guess this is a good place for you to stop the recording and try to find it. The bigger challenge would have been to figure this out several moves before, but even here, it's certainly worth trying to figure it out. Well, the answer is this. White has queen to c5, and black is just out a piece. He's going to lose a piece here no matter what. White is threatening to take on both d5, oops, didn't mean to do that, and to take on a5. And if, let's say, black plays something like c6, which protects both that knight And this knight, well, the problem is the white can double the attack here with knight takes d5, which discovers the attack on the knight on a5. So after queen to c5, white is simply winning, and this is unfortunately a known trap. So I was aware of this. I probably fell for it in a speed game at some point in my life, or I'd come across it in a book, so I knew I couldn't afford to repeat it. So I decided again to be principled here, to play the move knight f6. Okay, my opponent played knight c3. Again, I considered g6 here, but realized that, first of all, I have to worry about moves like e5. So on g6, e5 could be rather unpleasant, I thought. But also, again, after bishop d2, bishop g7, castles, castles, and bishop to c4, once again, this plan with d5 isn't working. Though perhaps d6 or rook to e8 really isn't so bad. So this might be a viable alternative, in fact. So it would really come down to whether e5 is, in fact, a good idea for white or not. So e5, knight to g4, and here probably, okay, actually this was kind of interesting. I did remember looking at this. So if queen to e2, there was knight to d4, and I don't think I was sure about what was happening here, but I did look at this, and I don't recall being especially happy about it, but it is kind of murky. So I kind of like, obviously if I can play knight to d5 and bishop to g5, the game is simply over, but presumably black can scrape up some kind of defense here. I mean, also d6, yeah, actually just d6 is good, because then after d takes e5, we've maybe got this pin. So this looks like it should be good for black. Bishop g7. Alright, so that's at least very unclear. I mean, I'm not sure just exactly what's going on there. But also, instead of queen to e2, white can try queen to e4. And now, I did consider this. So I thought about d5 with ideas kind of like this, where I sacrifice a pawn, but I get this really fast development going. And again, maybe it's a good playable idea. So I'm not entirely sure. Okay, maybe we can consider something like bishop to b5 here, threatening to take twice on c6. And if queen takes d6, bishop f4, and black's pieces are kind of vulnerable here, and white's development is really rather rapid and a little bit scary. So, for example, okay, maybe queen c5. Yeah, so queen c5 hitting f2. Yeah, that deserves consideration. All right, so perhaps this is playable, and this might be worthy of further investigation, this whole idea. Also, of course, after d5, white could simply grab the pawn, either with the queen or with the knight. Okay, so here, after queen d5, maybe bishop to f5, hitting the pawn on c2, and preparing maybe something like knight to b4 as well. So black's development is quite rapid here. And maybe another idea, okay, is knight takes d5, but bishop to f5 looks like it should be pretty good for black. Yeah, I think this is good for black. All right. Well, so this is actually quite fascinating, and is perhaps worthy of consideration, because again, in that main line after bishop d2, bishop c7, castles, castles, bishop c4, d6, and rook to e8 may in fact be quite all right. So, interesting things for further exploration. I'll actually give it a further look on my own as well. In any case, I decided, because at least I was under the impression, or I was thinking of the fianchetto plan again in terms of this d5 idea, and I was a little bit worried about e5 too. So I had rejected it here. and again decided to go the principled route and play the main line with bishop to b4. Okay, bishop to d2. At this point, there really isn't anything else to think about, so castles, castles, and here rook to e8 and queen g3. Okay, so I knew that this was the main line. I didn't really know anything about the main line beyond this. I mean, I knew a tiny bit. So I knew that both knight e4 and rook e4 were playable moves here. I didn't remember that d6 was playable, even though it was kind of funny. I remember that there was a Shirov-Karpov game in the center game in the 90s, and that Karpov won rather quickly, but I didn't remember that it was with d6. So that game continued f3, knight to e5, and the point of knight to e5 is, well, it does a couple of things. So it takes the c4 square away from white's bishop, so no bishops coming there, and this knight could come to g6 to help defend in some cases as well. Okay, so in the Shirov game, h4 was played, king h8, and now here Shirov played knight h3, which wasn't very good. Knight h5, c6, and then here he blundered with bishop to e2. Just an outright blunder because bishop takes h3, queen h3, bishop c3, and now white can't play bishop takes c3 because after knight f4 he simply loses a piece. So he had to play b takes c3, and after that capture, the fact that he has the bishop here really was insufficient compensation for his weak queen side, and he lost rather quickly. So knight f6. I'll just show the moves. You can examine them more carefully at your leisure. And here Shirov resigned. So a very fast loss for him, 23 moves from Dos Hermanos in 1995. Okay, so let's go back. So instead of knight to h3 is played by Shirov, h5 is playable. And okay, this is just more theory. We don't need to discuss that. I'm just pointing out that it exists. And the other main choice besides h4 is to play knight g to e2. And then here white can play queen g5 or queen f2. All right, all possible. Okay, so anyway, as I said, I didn't recall this, even though I recalled that there was a Karpov-Shirov game and that it was a disaster for Shirov. Okay, so the two moves that I knew about were knight e4 and rook e4, and I knew, or at least thought I remember, that knight takes e4 was considered especially risky. Though, other than knight takes e4, rook takes e4, I wouldn't have really known. I would have guessed c3 was the move, and I think this along with bishop to f4 are the main moves in this position. Okay, but I knew rook takes e4 was, I think, the most popular move, and that's in fact what I played. So rook takes e4, and this was the end of my theoretical knowledge. So I knew, I mean, it's a simple calculation, that knight takes e4 does nothing. I mean, it's just very good for black, because we have this double attack on the bishop. We regain our material, and with white having no pieces left developed after all the exchanges, it means that black is basically under no attack and is essentially up a pawn for nothing. So, of course, white doesn't play knight takes e4. In fact, as far as I know, it's probably never been played, at least at master level. So the main move here is the move that Stamnov played, a3, and came as kind of a surprise to me, though. Once I saw it on the board and I realized what my options were, I knew that I had still seen this position, though I really knew nothing about it. So here, while I had actually spent a fair amount of time up to this point trying to work things out for myself and kind of get into the game and confirm the theory and just get my mind working, really, here I was kind of on my own in a more clear-cut way. Okay, well, so the question is, what do I do with my bishop? Now, of course, I could take on c3, and slightly to my surprise, this is actually a theoretical move to take on c3. So this is playable, but after bishop c3 by white, he's got the bishop pair. This bishop on c3 is just a monster. I mean, it's, this is just a fantastic diagonal. He's going to follow up with moves like bishop to d3, and white's attacking prospects look just very, very nice. It may also play f3 first, or h3 to take away the g4 square from my rook, and then bring the bishop out and continue his development and his kingside attack. And note, too, that once my rook quits the fifth rank, fourth rank on the board, once it leaves this territory, white's queen can come to h4. So we can see some continuation with the pawn on f3, the bishop on d3, and the queen on h4, and the threat's bishop f6, followed by queen takes h7. Also g4, g5 could cause some more problems as well. So this just looked very uncomfortable to me, this idea of making that capture. Okay, well, what else can black play? Of course, he could play bishop to a5, trying to maintain this pin situation. And, all right, b4 really doesn't seem especially convincing here. b4 with the idea of then taking on e4, because once again, knight e4, and then black can play knight takes f2. So this really isn't a very good idea for white. But the reason why I don't like bishop to a5 is that now my bishop can't retreat to, let's say, d6 or e7 or f8, where it could help in the defense of the king side. So while I do maintain one positive feature of the bishop's location from b4, namely that it puts a little pressure on the knight on c3, and for the moment keeps the bishop on d2, nevertheless, abandoning my king side when white is going to go full blast over there at some point really doesn't at least feel like a comfortable idea. Now, I could play bishop to f8, so this is yet another possibility. But what I didn't really like about this is that I'm leaving this diagonal, or the bishop's diagonal, to the king side pretty well unimpeded. So it could go to f4, could go to g5, could go to h6 at some point. And so after something like, I don't know, probably again, maybe you can just take the exchange as well. I mean, it's another possible problem. But just a simple build-up with f3, and let's say I just bring my rook all the way home, and then he plays bishop to d3. All right, maybe knight to e5 isn't so bad here. So let's see, maybe h3 is the better way to play this. Okay, so h3, and then the bishop comes to d3, knight comes to f3, queen goes to h4, maybe g4, and so on. And this is rather, again, kind of unpleasant here. I don't have any weaknesses in my camp, but I also don't have a great deal of space, and my development is fairly poor. So this seemed to me an uncomfortable way to meet the a3 move. So finally, I settled on the move bishop to d6. And it looks kind of ugly, but I also had a vague feeling that I had seen this move before. And the point of this is very logical, because white's only really plausible response here is to play f4, which, in fact, my opponent played. But now you see I get at least two very good things from this. Now, he gets two things from this, too. So one, of course, is that he's meeting my threat. And the pawn on f4, actually, he's getting three things. So he stops the threat. He takes away the e5 square from my pieces, like my knight, so it can't go e5, g6, or e5, g4, let's say. And on e5, notice that it would stop, my knight on e5 would stop his bishop from going to d3 or to c4. So that would be a positive, and that's no longer available to me. Okay, the third point to f4 that makes it good for him is that it's also cutting my rook off from, let's say, a square like g4. So I can no longer play that either. And so the pawn on f4 safeguards his queen from harassment from both my rook and my dark squared bishop. However, what I have succeeded in doing as a result of inducing this move is to lock this bishop in on d2 and to give myself the e4 and maybe also the g4 squares as a more or less permanent possession. Okay, maybe that's exaggerating things a bit, but I certainly don't have to ever worry about a pawn kicking one of my pieces out of those squares. Well, out of e4. g4, of course, is the h3 move. So, after bishop d6, f4, I play rook to e8, and it turns out that I'm still in theory. And I'll point out, too, I mean, Stamnov was very nice, not deliberately, I'm sure, in playing very quickly. So let me know that, okay, I'm still making good book moves at this point. Okay, so he played bishop to d3, And once again, I've got a choice. So now my bishop on d6 really doesn't do anything. It's not as if I'm going to play g5 or anything crazy like that to try to take advantage of the pin. And it wouldn't really make much sense for me to play something like b6 and bishop to b7. So, you know, sometimes when you make a developing move like bishop to d6, you shouldn't think that, okay, that piece is out, and so now if I want to develop my other bishop, I ought to leave the bishop on d6 where it is and kind of work around it. Not at all. The bishop's performed the function that it went to d6 to perform, and now there's no reason for it to stay there. So the much better move, well, it's much better for me to play either bishop to f8 or bishop to c5. And as a matter of fact, both moves are, again, theoretical. And once again, my thought here was that I didn't want to play a purely passive defensive game here. So that was one point. A second point, which led me to reject bishop to f8, is that at some point I may want to bring my knight to e7. And from there it may go to g6 or to f5. But at least as long as it's on e7, it's further shutting in my bishop. So I decided that I wanted to play a little bit more actively. So I played bishop to c5, and another point of this move is that this bishop is simply very well posted here. So it can exert pressure on e3 in some cases, and also on f2. So I felt that if I needed to bring it back to f8 at some point, I could surely do that, but in the meanwhile it's better to play actively. And so that's what I chose. Okay, white played knight to f3. And now once again I've got a choice, this time between pushing the d-pawn one square or two squares. Once again, both moves are theoretical, and here I feel a little less strongly about my choice than I do about the in support of bishop to c5 over bishop to f8. So I played d5. I think d6 is the more common move, but both have been played by very strong players. Okay, so anyway, the point of d6 is, of course, that you're keeping white pieces off of the e5 square. And as we'll see later on, that, in fact, is an important consideration to take into account. On the other hand, by playing d5, I'm fighting for the e4 square. So both, it's a question of whether my fear of white grabbing e5 should outweigh my optimistic intentions towards the e4 square. So I played d5. Okay, and now here my opponent went wrong. And in fact, we had been following a game, Shabalov against Alexander Ivanov from the U.S. Championships in 1994. And in that game, Shabalov played the move that I in fact expected in this one, which was rook d to e1. And that game continued rook takes e1, rook takes e1, knight e7, and then we have a couple of wasted moves here, knight h4, knight g6, knight f3, knight e7, and now knight to e5. And from here, okay, so both bishop to f5 and knight f5 are possible, but maybe they transpose. So Ivanov played bishop to f5, takes and takes, queen d3, knight e7, g4. And here, I wouldn't say yet that Shabalov has an advantage, but he does have some initiative. And in the complicated game that ensued, he did go on to win. So I certainly think that Black's position is playable here. At the very worst, his position is only slightly inferior, and that's at the worst. But again, it's a dangerous position, and certainly against a player like Shabalov, Black's task is going to be a challenging one. Though I don't think that he's in grave difficulties yet at this point. So anyway, something like this I think would have represented a logical continuation of the opening. But instead, after my move d5, here Stamnov, quite a few letters in common, but a slightly weaker player. Shabalov did it again. Stamnov played queen to h4. Okay, and the reason why this is bad, though it's very logical, is that now when I play the move knight to e7, all of a sudden white's position is very bad. I'm simply going to put the knight on g6 or f5, and the net result will be that white will have simply lost some tempi. So here I would say that black is essentially up a pawn for nothing after one poor move by Stamnov. Now, I had used probably about 45 minutes on my clock at this point, and the time control in this event is game and 90 with 30-second increments after each move. So for 13 moves, I had used about half my time, not counting increments, while Stamnov had maybe used, I don't know. I'm not even sure if he had used, I think he had gained time, at least prior to queen to h4. I don't remember how long he spent on that move, but he spent a handful of minutes on it. But 45 minutes is still enough time to continue this game successfully, and here I've already shut down my opponent's attacking prospects. So I think I was very, very proud of my play up to this point, that I had dared to go into the main line, the principled variation, had figured things out very well, and had in fact received a clearly better, if not winning, position as my reward. So after knight to e5, I played knight to f5, and now white is simply in serious trouble. He can't play queen to g5 for the simple reason that h6 just bags the queen. He could play bishop takes f5, but that I think would be quite poor as well. I'm simply developing all of my pieces. I have the bishop here, I have more space, and notice that white doesn't have g4 because I can simply capture, and he can't play knight takes g4 because his queen is hanging. So in this position he plays queen to e1, and here, okay, I'm in terrific shape. Now I played, I think, the best move, and it's the obvious move. I played knight to g4, threatening very simply to play knight to f2, and also threatening to play f6. And at this point, I just assumed that the game would end rather quickly, and started to lose concentration, though I think I continued to play reasonably well for the next several moves. So this game isn't just about the chess and about the fascinating opening, but there are some interesting psychological aspects to this game as well. Okay, well here Stamnov found a very good way to continue the fight. He played queen to e2. And the point is, although from talking to him after the game, I'm not sure that he actually saw it. I'm not positive about this. So maybe he simply intended to sacrifice the exchange here with knight to f2, and then maybe try something funny involving queen to h5, though I see no version of that works after a simple move like g6. So calculate this position out and see what you think about knight to f2. Does it win? Does it lose? Is it just another move? What do you think black should play here? And if not knight to f2, then what? Okay, well, let's have a look here. I'll assume that you've all diligently analyzed this position and come up with your own conclusions. Well, I have to say that after the game, at least 2 or 3 people asked me why I didn't play knight to f2 either here or on the next move. And they did so in such a way that it was almost as if they thought that I was a beginner. So, of course, I saw knight to f2, but the problem with it is that white can respond with knight to a4. And if I take a rook, he plays knight takes c5, and you'll notice that my knight no longer has a way out after that. So black has at least a couple of possibilities here. So let's examine first knight takes d1, knight takes c5, and now something like knight b2, king b2, f6, which I considered during the game. The problem with this, however, is that after queen to h5, things are rather murky. So he's counterattacking on my knight on f5. Certainly g6 is of no use because simply knight takes g6. And black has to worry a great deal about white's very active pieces here. Certainly this is no clear-cut win. White has very good compensation for the material. Okay, so this is nothing really special here. Okay, another possibility might be queen to e7, trying simply to protect this bishop on c5. Here, however, white has another reasonable way to continue. So knight c5, now bishop f5, and then bishop to e3. So here, at least it might seem at first glance, as if black is even in danger of losing, but it's not quite that bad. Queen c2, bishop c2, and now after bishop f2, I can take the rook. And again, this is a position where black is somewhat better. I mean, he's got a rook and a couple of pawns for the two minor pieces, and because the knight isn't really secure on e5, black is for choice here, but it's not that big of an advantage just yet. I'm not sure just how serious it is here. So I think certainly black is to be preferred, but it's a long way from being a decisive advantage. So these kinds of variations are what led me to reject the immediate knight to f2, and I chose instead knight to d4. Now this forces, and this of course, I have to protect my knight, so just in case you hadn't noticed, white is threatening queen takes g4 here. Okay, so I played knight to d4. Queen f1 is the only move, because of course if queen to e1, I play f6, if nothing else. So queen to f1, and now knight to f2 again is not really clear. So let's look at some other. Well, we'll look at knight f2. Okay, so if knight f2 again, knight to a4, and now okay, I could play something modest like just knight takes d3, and then save my bishop. And I remain a pawn up. I've got the bishop here, so this would have been quite nice and a simple way to play. And in retrospect, maybe this is the simplest way for black to handle the position. But trying to be ambitious and win the exchange still really doesn't work. So queen at d6, and now not b4, because after bishop b6, queen takes b6, and black is winning. And I guess I should mention this. I assumed that perhaps most of you, if not all of you, realize this, but both here and also in the position, of course, when the bishop was on c5 or b6, queen f2 is never good because of knight to b3 check, followed by queen takes f2. So I mean, that's the basic tactical justification for black behind all of this. But in any case, even here, even without the hideous blunder queen takes f2, black is winning because now he or I can safely capture one of the rook's next move. But instead of b4, white has bishop to b4. And now there's no possibility of queen to b6. b6 would be just an outright blunder because of bishop takes c5, followed by queen takes f2. So bishop b4 is forced, and then queen f2. And here, okay, white actually is not in such bad shape. So he's still just the one pawn down, plus there's the possibility of bishop h7 and rook takes d4 in some cases too. So this really wouldn't have been so great. At least knight takes d3 would have been fine, but attempts with queen at d6 to make this knight f2 fork happen are not good. f6 is okay. Takes, rook e1, c6. Again, I'm basically clearly better. I'm up a pawn more or less for free here. Knight e5 I considered here too, winning the second pawn, but I wasn't so sure about a variation like this. So rook e8, knight a4, bishop h7, and rook takes d4. But as I look at it now, not in my mind's eye, but on an actual board, or at least an electronic board, really there's nothing at all to be afraid of here. So white's got three pieces out, but they don't really coordinate in any meaningful way. And black's bishops are going to rule the roost here after, let's say, queen f6 or c6 and further development. So black is absolutely wonderful here. Okay, well, instead of any of these continuations, I chose a5. And I don't think this is a poor move, though. It's a little bit, a little bit of a wish fulfillment chess here. So, of course, the point is now to play knight f2. And then knight to a4 means nothing because I can just go drop the bishop back to a7. And additionally, there's another possible continuation for me down the road to play c6, b5, and b4, or a4 and b4. So I'm at least gesturing towards a queenside attack with this move. And it isn't a bad move. Okay, white takes on g4, eliminating these knight f2 possibilities for good. Bishop g4, rook e1. Okay, c6, preparing b5 and protecting the d pawn. So that way there are never going to be, for example, any tricks where, let's say, if I were to push this pawn, white could play knight takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop c4. Okay, so I'm excluding that from happening. And the reason why that's important is that, let's say it's white to move here. All right, I was a little concerned about possibilities like f5 with the idea of Noah's arcing my bishop. So h3, bishop h5, g4. So such a possibility, I might want to meet with f6 to give myself this flight square. But, lo and behold, there's that knight takes d5 idea. Okay, so that's kind of the thinking that I had going here with the move c6. Okay, so now my opponent played king to b1. I played b5, and now he played bishop to e3. I had kind of expected h3, and perhaps this is better, but he played bishop to e3. And okay, so now I already realized the point of king to b1 because I was thinking, why would he make this strange move? There aren't any real obvious threats to the king that would encourage such an apparent waste of time. But see his idea, which is to play bishop to e3 without allowing knight to b3 check. So when the king was on c1, so let's say he plays it straight away, bishop to e3. Here I can play knight to b3, cb, bishop e3 check, and okay, this garnering of the bishop pair is certainly to my advantage. Okay, so king b1, b5, bishop e3, and now, in fact, probably I should still play knight to b3. And of course, note too, this in a way takes advantage of the king being on b1, because if bishop takes c5, knight to d2 wins the queen. So probably best here would be h3, drop the bishop back, now queen f2, d4, cb, rook e3, takes, queen c2, and here, in fact, white regains the pawn with this little trick. So he's hitting my bishop on c5, but in this position, black remains clearly better. And I think there are other ways that black can continue too. I mean, this whole variation isn't forced by any means, but still, black is for choice here. With the bishop pair, overall a better pawn structure, and the passed e-pawn as well. All right. Also possible is just to play something like queen to b6, completing my development, shoring up this knight on d4. And the reason why that's important is if I play something like queen to d7, after queen to f2, my position could be a little bit precarious here with this knight. All right. Instead, though, I had another idea, and so the question to ask yourselves at this point is whether black can play knight takes c2 safely. All right. So does this win a second pawn? Is it an exchanging combination, or is there some problem with it? So again, take your time, see what you can come up with, and we'll discuss the truth of the matter momentarily. Okay, well, I spent a bit of time on it, and unfortunately I missed something. And it was rather simple too. In fact, I saw it more or less immediately after he made his move, and maybe even before he made his move. So I played knight takes c2, and this is a serious error. Now, it works fine in a variation like this. So king takes c2, rook takes e3, rook takes e3, bishop takes e3, bishop h7 check. So this is more or less what I thought would happen. King h7, queen d3 check. Let's say g6, queen takes e3. And, okay, here I've got no real complaints. I'm still up a pawn. And, in fact, I have the move d4. So not only no complaints, but I'm simply winning here, because after a move like queen to g3, bishop to f5 saves the piece with check. Saves my piece with check. His piece is not to be saved. So this I thought was absolutely wonderful. I was more than happy to go down this route. Of course, white can't play bishop takes c5 because of rook e1 check, if nothing else. And after bishop c2, okay, initially I suspected this would just be the same thing, but I realized here that it's not at all the same thing, that in fact I'm just in big trouble now. Because after rook e3, bishop e3, he doesn't play bishop takes h7 check, but he plays queen to d3. And now things are not quite so happy here in my camp. So Queen H7 is trouble. Queen E3 is there, and at least the important thing is that Queen H7 isn't mate, but he's at least getting a couple of pawns. So he can take the H pawn, and then Queen H8 check, and he can take the G pawn. My bishop on G4 is kind of loose too. So D4 is maybe not forced, but it's close to forced. So now he played Queen H7, Queen H8, and here he could play Queen H4, but this would just repeat, King F8, and Queen takes G4. Okay, he can do that. It's fine. And then I either take his knight or play I take his knight. Sorry. So what he played is fine. Queen takes G7. And now here, there's actually a very interesting move after which the position is still, believe it or not, equal. So, of course, I'm very scared here with my king in the center. Excuse me. My bishop on G4 is loose. A little worried even about his H-pawn just running down the board. But my D-pawn is very strong. My bishop on E3 is pretty good for the moment. And in fact, black has a very good move here, and a kind of an unusual one, which is B4. And I'll simply leave this to you for your own analytical pleasure, but point out that I played D takes C3. And I realized that, okay, in this variation I'm losing a pawn, but I felt that I would have good drawing chances here, and I think my assessment was right. So I don't feel too many regrets. I mean, B4 is objectively better, but I think the way I had calculated this out was pretty decent. So aside from knight takes C2 being a blunder, I think once I did that, I didn't panic, and I did the best I could to keep the position as level as possible. Okay, so he plays rook to E1, threatening mayhem to my king. I play queen at D2, queen E5 check, bishop E6, and okay, here maybe rook takes E3 is a little bit better. Queen D6, queen E4, king D7, rook C3, rook E8. And in this position, I think I'm only a little bit worse. And the reason is that, first of all, my remaining pawns, I mean, I'm down one pawn, but my pawn structure, what's left of it, is actually very, very good. My pieces are well posted. My bishop's going to come to D5. I can play B4. And his extra pawn, which is passed, is the H pawn, and it's going to be very difficult for him to promote that. I mean, it can go maybe even to H7 with relative ease, but that final step to H8 is not going to be easy at all. And I also might be able to play F5 at some point myself to make the pawn's situation on H7, should it ever get there, not 100% secure. So I think I'm just a little bit worse here. It's definitely far from fatal, but of course white's better. All right, well, instead of rook takes E3, Stamnov played queen takes E3. And actually, I didn't really want to see this because I was more or less, I was hoping that he would overpress in the position, since I felt like my king was actually fairly safe, where this puts me in a position where I essentially have no winning chance. All I can do is just fight for the draw. Well, we'll see about that, ironically enough. So now here actually an interesting idea is B4 and then on F5 to play B3, but this didn't enter my mind at the time. So queen takes E3, rook takes E3, and now unfortunately I have to lose a pawn because of the threat of F5. So I have to get out of the way. I play king D6, and I think this is the right decision, by the way, not F6, because again, my F pawn can more or less handle, my F pawn and my bishop and my rook can handle his G and F pawns with no problem, and the H pawn, it can go only so far before it's kind of a lone ranger, and my rook can handle it. So anyway, here he could have played rook takes C3. What he didn't like is that I would then have the opportunity to play B4 and get some counterplay on the queen side. So he played B takes C3. And while this fragments his pawns, it's not obvious that this should be significant in any way, because well, the C file is closed, the A file is closed, and the only other way for me to attack the pawns would be with my rook on the third rank, and that looks heavily impossible, or at least we should say heavily improbable, or by putting my king on C4, but that's not really very promising. I mean, white simply plays king to b2 and can chase my king back whenever he wants to. Okay, well here I played rook to h8. And I did something a little bit mischievous here. So I had watched part of this DVD by Nigel Davis called Chess for Scoundrels. And one thing he mentions in there is the inappropriate draw offer. And the idea behind the inappropriate draw offer is that there can be occasions where you offer a draw where it's slightly inappropriate, and the point of it is to kind of provoke your opponent to be a little overly macho, at least if it's a guy, to be a little bit overly, to really make the point that no, I'm much better, and I'm going to prove it to you now, and I'm going to grind you into the ground like a fine paste. And that's in fact what happens here in a couple of moves. So he plays h3, which is obvious. I played rook to h4, and here what he should have played is the patient rook to f3, bishop to d5, rook f2, c5. And again, I mean, I think I have very good drawing chances here, so it's not like I'm offering a draw in a lost position. But, of course, I mean, he's better, and so from that standpoint, the draw offer is slightly inappropriate. But the reason why I did it, you remember back here, when he played queen takes e3, so I mentioned that, I didn't like this because it showed that he was going to take this position patiently. He wasn't going to try to blow me off the board. He was just going to handle things very slowly, very quietly, one bit at a time. So by offering the draw in this position, I had hoped to get him to be a little bit overeager, and that's in fact what he was with the move g4. So once he played g4, this looks very natural, trying to get the king side, to have it bloom like a flower here, so the pawns just open up and start rumbling down the board. But in fact, this is an error. So see if you can figure out why g4 is a mistake. Okay, well the answer to this question is, I think, a very nice rejoinder, f5. After which I believe that white has no real winning chances anymore. So again, I mean, it's probably a draw with best play in any case, but now I think white has really nothing. Okay, the point is, if he takes with the bishop, then I simply swap, and I'm just winning the f-pawn. So that's fine, and of course the h-pawn is not threatening at all. And as if to make things even better for me, we see that white's a and c pawns look a little bit weak as well. All right. So instead of that, other possibilities. So one kind of funny move that I sort of hoped he would play was rook to g3. And the idea here is that after f takes g4, white could consider f5 and then play h takes g4. Of course, the problem here is that I have g takes h3. And now after f takes e6, h2, I'm promoting. So very simple, very nice and convenient for me. Because bishop to e4, rook takes e4, rook h3, I have rook to e1 check. And I win. And after g takes h3, well, what else can he play? I mean, he can just kind of run back, but that's no good either. So rook to g1, h2, bishop d5, and the game is over. Okay, so that was the clever idea there. So rook to g3 is no good. Bishop takes f5 is no good. I mean, of course, you can play rook to g3, but he has to take back on g4. But then I'm not down anything. So rook takes or bishop takes, and in fact, black is even a little bit better, but it shouldn't be meaningful really. Okay, maybe bishop g4 is better. All right. In any case, he chose another option. He played g takes f5. So now I'm down 2 pawns, but after bishop to d5, then you can see that I'm winning the f4 pawn back immediately, and the remaining pawns, I mean, you can see all of his pawns are isolated. 2 of them are doubled. My king position is better, my bishop position is better, my rook is a little bit better, so there are really no winning chances whatsoever for white. So he played king c1. I played rook takes f4, And here again, he made a somewhat strange move, though. I mean, it's logical, but it's just an oversight. So I shouldn't say it's strange. It's quite well motivated, but just a mistake. So he played rook to e2, and the idea is to play rook to h2, of course. Rooks belong behind passed pawns most of the time. But the problem here is that I'm now winning yet another pawn. Well, I'm getting my pawn back, and we can see that White's remaining pawns, again, are going to continue to be weak. So here he made the right decision. Of course, he should not keep the h-pawn, so he played king to d2, rightly giving up the h-pawn. So after rook h3, of course, this position should be drawn, though at this point I now no longer had any intentions of at least offering a draw. I mean, I wouldn't expect to win, but I would push. You never know what could happen. All right, well here White decided to play the move bishop to d3, and now is a good time to figure out what Black ought to do in this position. So should we go for the a pawn, play maybe something like rook to h1 and rook to a1? Should we try to round up the f5 pawn before doing anything else? Maybe play rook to f3 and maneuver the bishop to maybe d7. What should Black play in this position? Also, we can try to figure out what White is up to with bishop to d3. Maybe he wants to play something like a4 and then c4. Who knows? So give it a try. See if you can figure out what the big idea is, and figure out what Black ought to do. Okay, well, hopefully I disguised it well enough for you guys. Didn't want to make it be too obvious, but in fact, Black has a very simple winning combination here that my opponent simply overlooked. Rook takes d3 check. So we trade off to a king and pawn ending, and I'm winning the f5 pawn, and the only question is whether I get in any danger with my queenside pawns. But as we'll see, I have a little resource at the end of the combination such that I don't have any problem. So takes, king e5, king d3, and now the key move. Okay, not king takes f5. This would be a horrible move because of king to d4, and now probably it's a draw. Maybe I'm even worse, but the right move is just to play, of course, c5. So I keep his king out, and now White is simply losing. You can work out the details yourself. I'll just show the end of the game here. My opponent played a4, and this is a little bit of a bluff, and I was prepared for this and called it. So simply b takes a4. And the point is twofold. So if he plays king to c4, going for my pawns, I just play king takes f5, and he's in Zugzwang. Once he takes my pawn, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Once he takes my pawn, my a pawn runs, and of course I'm queening much faster than he is. So this is a trivial win. On the other hand, if he had chosen not to go to c4, pardon me, but played something like king c2, well, we'll see it's not good enough. And okay, if he plays king to b2, just c4, or basically any legal move, is winning easily. And on king takes a4, king c3, king a5, king b3 is simplest. And the next four moves, see my c pawn promote. So after b takes a4, king c4, king takes f5, Stamnov resigned. So that was the end of the game. A very interesting and fascinating game, I think. Certainly entertaining. Wasn't entertaining for me after I played knight takes c2 for a little while, but fortunately things came back around. So I hope you enjoyed it and found it instructive as well. I think there are quite a number of very interesting points in the game that I think bear further consideration, both from a chess point of view, or I should say a purely chess point of view, and also from the psychological standpoint. So thank you. I look forward to seeing your comments, and I'll see you again next week with another game. Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.